One of the reasons that I became a big fan of Rabindranath Tagore about 2.5 decades ago was not only because of the power of his poetry and his writings and his music, but because of the power of his advocacy and principle. You know, he was the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, but he was one of the few people to have renounced the British knighthood in protest of the massacre of people in his homeland. And I want to share with you some of the words of wisdom from that gentleman, Rabindranath Tagore, that would be of relevance to us as we pursue this project of intentionality, not lamentation. He said, "Let us unite, not in spite of our differences, but through them. For differences can never be wiped away, and life would be so much the poorer without them. Let us all human races keep their own personalities and yet come together. Not in uniformity, not in a uniformity that is dead, but a unity that is living." In order for any society, any nation, any people, any community to have unity that is living, you have to have hope. And so let me share one powerful, simple sentence from another champion, advocate, fighter against racism in his homeland, Desmond Tutu. This is what Desmond Tutu said: "Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. We don't have the luxury of giving up hope. We have got to see light in spite of the darkness." Help me welcome our next speaker, Mr. Norwell Hinds.
Okay, I'm not going to repeat all the protocols. I think everybody has done a good job of that. But I will start at the end, just in case I'm zapped by technology, and say, present to you a conclusion. The conclusion is that we don't have a race problem, that the real issue is economic security. So I'll start with that, all right? And I want to also reflect on something I saw on Facebook. One of the local DJs posted on his Facebook page about a special Caribbean mental characteristic that I saw Ms. Shaw demonstrate when she said, "True, true." That can only be Caribbean. He said on his post, there's something about the Caribbean mind that we feel that when we repeat a word, that word has particular powers when it's repeated. Somebody asked him, "Do you know this guy named Shaquille?" He said, "Shaquille who?" Shaquille. He said, "Oh, yeah, I know that Shaquille." And I think that is something unique about the Caribbean spirit, the Caribbean mental ability, which also speaks to our ideas about race. Earlier today, in a conversation with two friends, I touted the idea of a reboot of academic freedom. Now, take it for whatever that's either nothing or everything. If we ever talk about race and you go to Palm Court on Wednesday night, or you go to any of the bars and you see young people partying in there, you want to know, do we have a race problem? But anyway, I talked to this young man about rebooting academic freedom by the UGSS. And the youngest in the group, who is 24 years old, turns to me and he asks, "Wisdom." So therein I have my first confession for my presentation, that at 31, my points of reference will be very different to the current cohort of young people, according to the UN at least, 15 to 24-year-olds, because, simply I probably don't speak their language anymore. And therefore, I'm not speaking so much on behalf of youth as I'm trying to situate some youth ideas in the problematic race discourse in Guyana. My second confession is that 7 minutes that I've been given is an awfully long time to say the obvious thing, which is that there can be no future for the youth of Guyana if we don't address the race problem. So that's what I can end with, so I can leave, but I'll continue. And my final confession is that I'm going to use a Rodneyite definition or perspective of race, which I'd hope would have been defined earlier. And I think it's captured well by an extract by Dr. David Hinds, and I reference him particularly and deliberately to make another point about his contribution to our discourse and the injustice, I believe, that is being done to him, and that we must make a statement about that. But in his writing, he said, and I'm quoting, Rodney grounded his perspective on race in the broader context of class and anti-imperialism. In this regard, he argued that the interests of the black ruling class were inimical to black power, which, according to him, must be rooted in the aspirations of the mass. So Rodney himself also was alluding, therefore, to an idea of good governance. How do you arrive at the aspirations of the masses? He went on to say that the local government was given to a white, brown, and black petty bourgeoisie who were culturally the creations of white capitalist society and who therefore supported the white imperialist system. Because, of course, they gained personally and because they have been brainwashed into aiding the oppression of black people. Of course, Rodney approached racism simultaneously from the point of view of black power in the face of oppression, hence a particular reference to black people, but also from the point of view of the unity of working people as the targets of oppression by the elite, and therefore he articulated, in a sense, a multi-ethnic solidarity. So my brief presentation points to two programs that I was involved with in my relatively young life, 8 years apart, one in 2008 and the other in 2016. I also did 8 years apart deliberately because 8 is more than 7. So I'm referencing those two programs. The program in 2008 followed the massacres in Buxton and Bartico, and Guyana, a youth organization that was involved at the time, we constructed and conceptualized a project on the UNDP's Building Trust Fast Track grant that they had made available at the time. The massacres were of particular concern because of the potential to exacerbate ethnic and social polarities that always seem to sort of be subsurface. East Indian Guyanese were the targets of the attacks in Luziknan, and these attacks were perceived to be carried out by a criminal gang whose members were Afro-Guyanese and that operated in Buxton, a predominantly Afro-Guyanese neighboring village. The word on the street for most Guyanese at that time was that, you know what, we just fed up with this place. So we felt that that was instructive in itself, conceptually, that it spoke to a sense of belonging, a sense of ownership, a sense of trust. And we built our entire program around that. So the 6-month initiative was intended to contribute to a culture of ownership and belonging in the Guyanese democracy by promoting Guyanese pride and a culture of Guyanese pride and solidarity across cultures in terms of knowledge, understanding, and respect. As part of the project, we conducted surveys in West Ronville, Kitty, Agricola, Buxton, Luziknan, and Bartico. So my first main point, perceptions of community, especially as supported and presented in the media, affect intra-community relations and impact on race relations. We found that by refocusing on things which communities shared, which they felt they had rights to and a legitimate claim to, sometimes even a historic claim to, were very important for bridging those differences and creating the cultural exchange that is very necessary for our future. In 2016, I was project coordinator for a project that was being implemented by U.S. State Department contractor Counterpart International, funded by the USAID. The project was called the Youth and Citizens Participation Project. And we felt that part of the theory of change, to address social relation issues, we wanted to promote social cohesion through a participatory engagement that involved local government, authorities, elected officials, citizens, community groups, civil society groups, and others in 10 communities in the country. The YCP project used methodologies and tools such as community dialogues, participatory community action planning, and so on, to foster social cohesion among the communities and to promote mutual investment. Mutual investment, we want to understand that. So that we could design together in those communities mutually beneficial projects for those communities that were involved. The theory of change was that if we put two communities together that had historic issues or could be said to have had historic issues of working together and give them something to work on together and a prize, so to speak. What's the prize? You get some money, a small grant, to implement a project that the communities together had to agree on. So we had several communities, but to give an example of how we constructed the communities, Hopetown and Bushlat, for example, were paired. West Rungveld and Alexander Village, I'm from West Rungveld, and Alexander Village had some traditional issues. We also did work in Mabaruma, and then we went to communities like Bell West, and some others that I can't remember at the moment. So we felt that the confidence and the trust that would be built through effective collaboration at the local level would lead to enhanced openness for cooperation and collaboration at the national level. So my main point, number 2, young people in particular, because also in this project, a significant component was actual surveys and research that we did. Young people in particular seemed more interested in the development of their communities than in the race group that managed it. That was our finding. So, to the end, which I started with, the LAPUP survey of 2016, which is the same year we did the second project, which is the Latin American Public Opinion Poll, confirmed what we know from both of these projects. Economy was a significant issue of concern overwhelmingly for most Guyanese. Crime and security, a second issue. And these are the issues which, from a good governance perspective, are critical to addressing race problems in this country. Professor Mohamed, and in closing, mentioned some mixed Guyanese, the mixed Guyanese reality in Guyana, and I wanted to use that as an opportunity to also tell a little story about a friend of mine, one of my good friends, and I know most of you know this story or a similar story. One of my friends applied for a job. His name is Ronald Persaud, and he went to the interview for the job, and he's sitting there, and somebody asked him, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I'm here for an interview." He said, "Oh, really? Oh no, wrong Persaud. You're the wrong Persaud. You're not the right Persaud for this job." So, in closing, I am not sure, and I deliberately haven't touched at all on reconciliation, because I have some conceptual model myself about the term, because my English teacher and my good friend over there, Charlene, also who's an English lecturer at UG, would say you always got to look at words and be deliberate about the words you use. And I don't know if I ever really understand what reconciliation means, because what are you conciliating back to, because there is nothing that exists to conciliate back to. So what really we're asking for, what really we should be aspiring to, is a total destruction of systems of oppression and the setting up in place of those systems entirely new systems born of our imagination. And I believe that actually our indigenous community has some lessons for us on how to do that. And again, on words and the use of words, there's another confession I want to make in closing. I deliberately didn't publicly support the parking meter protests that they had in the city some time ago. Because one of the slogans was bullyism, green monster, and so on. And for many decades, I myself, as a young person growing up, this term, bully, was used in a particular context and was used to refer to a particular group of people. And I felt that unless we were very deliberate, even in our activism, in deconstructing in our own minds the words we use and what those words mean and what resonance they have in the context and how we're deliberately or not deliberately contributing to a context of poor governance and disharmony, that we're not being responsible activists. So I think that ends, and I hope that I stuck to close to 7 minutes, at least.